The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late September. Frank Holloway, a 72-year-old former construction foreman from Pittsburgh, had driven himself to the emergency room convinced he was having a heart attack. Chest tightness, shortness of breath, cold sweats, all the classic signs. The ER doctors ran every test imaginable. EKG, cardiac enzymes, chest x-rays, the full battery. Everything came back normal. "Mr. Holloway," the young doctor said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "Your heart is fine. This appears to be anxiety. We're going to send you home with some information about stress management." Frank sat there in that sterile room, wearing a hospital gown that didn't close properly in the back, and felt something break inside him. Not his heart. That was apparently fine. Something deeper, because he knew what that doctor didn't know, what he hadn't told anyone, not even his wife of 47 years sleeping at home, worried sick. For the past 14 months, Frank hadn't been able to make love to his wife. Not once. Not even close. And it was killing him in ways that no EKG could measure. "I'm Dr. Charles Bennett, and I've spent the last 35 years of my career understanding something that most of medicine completely misses. When a man loses his intimate capability after 60, he doesn't just lose a physical function. He loses his sense of self. His identity fractures, and that fracture creates a cascade of consequences that affect everything. His relationships, his health, his will to keep fighting, his very reason for waking up in the morning." Frank's midnight drive to the ER wasn't about his heart. It was about terror. The silent, suffocating terror that comes from watching yourself disappear piece by piece while everyone around you pretends not to notice. But here's what nobody told Frank, and what most men his age never learn. What's happening to him isn't random. It isn't just getting old. And it sure as hell isn't irreversible. Tonight, I'm going to share something with you that changed Frank's life completely. Not a pill. Frank had already tried those, and they worked maybe one time out of 4, leaving him with headaches and a bitter taste in his mouth. Not surgery or expensive treatments. Something far more fundamental and far more powerful. I'm going to show you the hidden connection between what's happening in your bedroom and what's happening in every cell of your body right now. Because that connection is the key to everything. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Before we go further, I need to ask you something personal. Have you noticed that when you can't perform sexually, you start pulling away from other things too? Maybe you stopped going to the gym because, what's the point? Maybe you declined that invitation to the reunion because you don't feel like yourself anymore. Maybe you've started wondering if your best years are behind you. If this is just what the rest of life looks like, a slow fade into irrelevance. If you've had even one of those thoughts, you need to hear what I'm about to tell you. 3 days after Frank's ER visit, he ended up in my office. Not because of a referral. His regular doctor had given him a prescription and a pat on the back. Frank found me because his wife, Gloria, had started searching online late at night when she couldn't sleep. She found an article I'd written about the real causes of erectile dysfunction in older men, and something in it made her cry. "This is Frank," she told him the next morning. "Every word of this is you." When Frank walked into my office, I didn't see a patient. I saw my own father. I saw every man who built this country with his hands and his back, who fought wars and raised families, and never once asked for special treatment. Men who were taught that complaining is weakness, that you push through pain, that your value is measured by what you can still do. And I saw the quiet desperation in his eyes, the look of a man who's drowning but won't call for help because he doesn't want to burden anyone. "Doc," Frank said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I don't even know if you can help me. I've tried the pills. They work sometimes, but it's not the same. It feels mechanical. And lately, they're not working much at all. My wife says it doesn't matter, but I know it does. I can see it in her eyes." I let him talk. For 40 minutes, I just listened. Because that's the first thing men like Frank need. Someone who will actually listen to the whole story, not just prescribe something and move on. He told me about waking up at 3 in the morning, his mind racing. About avoiding situations where he and Gloria might be intimate because the failure hurt too much. About feeling like he was letting her down every single day. About the shame that followed him around like a shadow he couldn't shake. "The worst part," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "is that I feel like I'm disappearing. Like the man I was is just gone, and I don't know how to get him back." That's when I knew we weren't just dealing with a physical problem. We were dealing with an identity crisis that happened to have physical symptoms. I pulled out a piece of paper and drew a simple diagram, a circle with 5 interconnected sections. "Frank," I said, "what you're experiencing isn't one problem. It's 5 problems that feed into each other, creating a downward spiral. And until we address all 5, nothing's going to change permanently." The 5 sections were vascular health, hormonal balance, nervous system function, psychological state, and cellular energy production. I explained how each one affects the others, how damage in one area creates stress in all the others, how the whole system can collapse even when individual parts still test normal. "Your ER visit," I continued, "that wasn't anxiety in the traditional sense. That was your nervous system crying out, because it's been under siege for months, maybe years. Your body's been sending you signals, the erectile issues, the fatigue you mentioned, the brain fog, the irritability. And you've been trying to ignore them or treat them separately. But they're all connected, Frank. They're all the same crisis manifesting in different ways." I could see something shift in his expression. Not hope exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who's finally hearing an explanation that matches their actual experience. "Here's what most doctors won't tell you," I said, leaning forward. "The pharmaceutical approach treats symptoms. Pop a pill, force some blood flow, hope for the best. But it doesn't fix anything. It's like turning up the radio to drown out the knocking sound in your engine. The knocking doesn't go away. You just can't hear it anymore." Frank nodded slowly. "So what's the knocking in my engine?" "Inflammation," I said. "Oxidative stress, vascular damage, hormone disruption, mitochondrial dysfunction. These aren't just medical terms, Frank. They're actual processes happening in your body right now that are destroying your ability to function, not just sexually, but in every way that matters." I showed him his blood work from his recent physical. His doctor had told him everything looked fine, but I pointed out what fine actually meant. His inflammation markers were elevated. His free testosterone was in the basement. His vitamin D was critically low. His homocysteine, a marker of vascular damage, was concerning. His fasting insulin suggested insulin resistance. "But my doctor said—" Frank started. "I know what your doctor said," I interrupted gently. "Your numbers are within the normal range. But normal doesn't mean optimal, especially for a man your age who wants to actually live, not just exist. These numbers are telling me your body is struggling, Frank, and the erectile issues are just the most obvious symptom of that struggle." For the first time since he'd walked into my office, I saw something besides defeat in Frank's eyes. I saw curiosity, maybe even the beginning of hope. "Can it be fixed?" he asked. Not overnight, I said honestly, and not with any single magic solution. But yes, it can be improved. Significantly. I've seen it happen hundreds of times with men just like you, but it requires understanding something crucial about how your body actually works after 60. I pulled out another piece of paper and drew a simple flowchart. Your body has priorities, Frank. When it's under stress, chronic inflammation, nutrient deficiency, hormonal chaos, it goes into survival mode. And in survival mode, sexual function gets shut down first. Your body basically says, "We're in crisis. We can't afford the energy and resources for reproduction right now." "But I'm not trying to reproduce," Frank said with a weak smile. "I just want to feel like a man again." "I know," I said, "but your body doesn't make that distinction. It just knows it's struggling to keep up with basic cellular function, and it's rationing resources. Sexual capability is a luxury your system thinks it can't afford right now." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. The good news is this: when you address the root causes, when you reduce the inflammation, restore the hormonal balance, repair the vascular damage, support the cellular energy production, your body naturally restores sexual function. Not because you're forcing it with medication, but because it no longer has a reason to keep it shut down. "How long does that take?" Frank asked. "That depends on how committed you are and how damaged things are currently. But most men start seeing improvements within 4 to 6 weeks. Real, sustainable improvements. Not the hit-or-miss results you get with pills, but actual restoration of natural function." Frank left my office that day with a comprehensive plan. But more importantly, he left with understanding. And understanding, I've learned, is the most powerful medicine there is. The plan I gave Frank wasn't complicated, but it was specific. It addressed all 5 areas of that interconnected system we discussed, and it centered around something most men overlook completely: the profound impact of what you eat every single day on your masculine function. Let me explain something that will change how you think about food forever. Your ability to achieve and maintain firmness depends on a complex cascade of events. It starts in your brain with signals triggered by desire or arousal. Those signals travel down your spinal cord and out through nerves to the pelvic region. When they arrive, they trigger the release of nitric oxide in the blood vessel walls. That nitric oxide causes the smooth muscle cells in those vessels to relax, allowing blood to rush in and create firmness. Sounds simple, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Every single step in that cascade depends on nutrients, enzymes, and cellular processes that must be functioning optimally. Your nerves need certain fats and minerals to transmit signals properly. Your blood vessels need specific amino acids to produce nitric oxide. Your smooth muscle cells need adequate energy production to respond. Your hormones need particular building blocks to maintain proper levels. And almost every one of these critical factors is directly influenced by what you eat. But here's the part that changes everything. After 60, your body's ability to extract and utilize nutrients from food decreases dramatically. Your stomach produces less acid, making protein digestion less efficient. Your intestinal lining becomes less permeable, reducing absorption. Your liver becomes less effective at converting nutrients into active forms. Your cellular machinery slows down, requiring more raw materials to produce the same results. This means that the diet that worked fine when you were 40 is completely inadequate when you're 70. You're not just getting older. Your nutritional needs are fundamentally different. I explained all this to Frank, and I could see the gears turning in his head. "So even if I'm eating healthy foods," he said, "I might not be getting what I need?" "Exactly," I confirmed. "And worse, You might be eating things that are actively working against you. Foods that increase inflammation. Foods that interfere with hormone production. Foods that damage blood vessels. Foods that most people consider healthy but are actually toxic for men in your situation. Over the next hour, I walked Frank through the specifics. I showed him which foods contain the precursors to nitric oxide production, the amino acids L-arginine and L-citrulline that his aging body desperately needs but isn't getting enough of. I explained which foods are richest in the specific minerals required for testosterone synthesis, zinc, magnesium, selenium, and why his current diet was leaving him deficient despite eating well. But more importantly, I showed him the hidden dangers. "Frank," I said, pulling out a list I'd compiled over years of clinical work, "there are foods that almost everyone considers healthy, especially for seniors. Foods that are recommended by mainstream nutrition advice. But for men dealing with what you're dealing with, these foods are poison." His eyes widened. "Like what?" "Let me tell you about what happened with another patient of mine," I said. "A man named Eugene, 74 years old, retired postal worker, came to me with the same issues you have. When I reviewed his diet, he was eating oatmeal every morning. You know, for his cholesterol. Whole wheat bread with every meal. Complex carbs, supposedly good for him. And snacking on what he called heart-healthy foods all day long." "Sounds pretty good," Frank said. "That's what Eugene thought too," I replied. "But here's what nobody told him. Many whole grains contain compounds called phytates that bind to zinc and magnesium in your digestive system, preventing absorption. Eugene was eating minerals with every meal, and then immediately neutralizing them. His body was starving for nutrients even though he was eating constantly." I paused to let that sink in. "But it gets worse. The high carbohydrate load from all that grain was keeping his insulin elevated all day long. And elevated insulin directly suppresses testosterone production. He was unknowingly castrating himself with every healthy meal." Frank's jaw dropped. "Nobody ever told me this." "Nobody tells anyone this," I said, "because nutrition advice is generalized. It treats all adults the same. But a 72-year-old man trying to restore his masculine vitality has completely different needs than a 30-year-old athlete or a 50-year-old woman. The advice you're getting wasn't designed for you." I continued explaining the specific foods that were sabotaging Frank's recovery. The vegetable oils in his salad dressings that were massively tilting his omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, promoting inflammation throughout his vascular system. The soy protein in his healthy protein bars that contained phytoestrogens, plant compounds that mimic estrogen in the body and further suppress his already low testosterone. "What about things like flaxseed?" Frank asked. "My wife puts it in smoothies because it's supposed to be healthy." "Another perfect example," I said. "Flaxseed contains lignans, which are converted to phytoestrogens in your gut. For a woman going through menopause, that might be beneficial. For a man trying to restore testosterone and masculine function, it's exactly what you don't need." I showed Frank study after study, research from institutions like Harvard, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, demonstrating how specific dietary compounds affect hormone levels, vascular function, and sexual performance in aging men. This wasn't alternative medicine or fringe theory. This was peer-reviewed science that somehow never makes it into practical advice. "The food industry doesn't want you to know this," I explained, "because the profitable foods, the processed grains, the vegetable oils, the soy products, are exactly the ones that are harming you. And the pharmaceutical industry isn't going to tell you either, because if you fix the problem through diet, You don't need their expensive medications. So, what should I be eating? Frank asked, pulling out his phone to take notes. That's where it gets interesting, I said. Because the foods that actually support masculine vitality after 60 aren't exotic or expensive. They're foods humans have been eating for thousands of years. But they're not the foods that get advertised or that show up in mainstream health advice. I outlined for Frank what I call the Vitality Protocol, a way of eating designed specifically to address the 5 interconnected systems we discussed earlier. Foods rich in saturated fats and cholesterol, which despite decades of demonization are absolutely essential for hormone production. Organ meats, which contain concentrated nutrients that aging bodies can't get from muscle meat alone. Specific seafoods rich in omega-3s and minerals. Certain vegetables, not the ones everyone recommends, but specific varieties that support rather than hinder male hormone function. But Doc, Frank said, looking confused, this goes against everything I've been told about healthy eating. I know it does, I replied, and that's exactly why you're sitting in my office instead of out living your life. The advice you've been following was designed to prevent heart disease in middle-aged people based on outdated science from the 1960s. It was never designed to optimize masculine function in men over 60. Those are completely different goals, requiring completely different approaches. I spent another 30 minutes going through specific protocols with Frank. Not just what to eat, but when to eat it, how to combine foods for maximum absorption, how to prepare them to minimize anti-nutrients and maximize bioavailability. I explained the concept of nutrient timing, eating certain foods at certain times of day to support natural hormone rhythms. This is going to sound strange, I told him, but one of the most powerful things you can do is eat a higher fat, higher protein breakfast and push your first meal of the day later, closer to noon. This supports your body's natural testosterone production cycle and improves insulin sensitivity. But I've always heard breakfast is the most important meal, Frank protested. For kids and young adults, maybe, I said. But for a 72-year-old man with low testosterone and insulin resistance, that early morning carb-heavy breakfast is suppressing your hormones right when they should be peaking naturally. I could see Frank's mind working, processing all this information that contradicted decades of conventional wisdom. But I could also see something else: excitement. For the first time in over a year, he was hearing an explanation that made sense of his experience and offered a clear path forward. "How long before I see results?" he asked again. "Everyone's different," I said honestly. "But most men notice something within the first 2 weeks, usually better energy and mental clarity. By week 4, most report improvement in morning firmness, which is one of the best indicators that vascular function is improving. By week 8, if you're following the protocol consistently, you should see substantial improvement in all areas." "And if I don't?" Frank asked quietly. "Then we dig deeper," I said. "We run more specialized tests, look for hidden infections or toxicity issues, adjust the protocol." But Frank, in 35 years of doing this, I've only had a handful of men who didn't respond at all to this approach. And in every one of those cases, there was an underlying issue we eventually uncovered and addressed. Frank left that day with a detailed written plan, a list of recommended foods and supplements, and something even more valuable: hope. Real, tangible hope, based not on wishful thinking, but on understanding the actual mechanisms at work in his body. I'm going to tell you what happened to Frank, but first, I need you to understand something crucial. What I'm about to describe isn't a miracle. It isn't magic. It's simply what happens when you give your body what it actually needs and stop giving it what's hurting it. Frank called me 3 weeks into the protocol. "Doc," he said, his voice different somehow. "I need to come in and talk to you." My heart sank. I assumed he was calling to tell me it wasn't working, that he was giving up. But when he walked into my office 2 days later, I immediately knew I'd been wrong. He looked different. His posture was straighter. His eyes were clearer. And he had this subtle but unmistakable air of confidence that hadn't been there before. "It's working," he said simply. "Not completely, not like I was 30 years old again, but Doc, it's working. And more than that, everything else is better too." He told me that within the first week, he'd noticed his energy improving. The afternoon fog he'd been experiencing for years had lifted. He was sleeping better, waking up more refreshed. His mood had stabilized, no more of the irritability and short temper that had been straining his relationships. But the real change, he said, leaning forward, happened about 10 days in. I woke up one morning with something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Morning firmness, not just a little, I mean full, natural firmness without pills or anything. I nodded, unsurprised. That's one of the first signs that vascular function is improving. Your body's ability to achieve overnight and morning firmness is actually one of the most sensitive indicators of cardiovascular health. Gloria noticed the difference too, Frank continued, his voice softening. Not just physically, but in how I was acting. I was more present, more engaged. We've had more real conversations in the past 3 weeks than we had in the previous 6 months. "And intimacy?" I asked. Frank smiled, a genuine, unforced smile I hadn't seen before. "Twice so far. Real, natural intimacy. No pills, no pressure. It just happened, like it used to." Tutti. Over the next 45 minutes, Frank and I went through his experience in detail. What had been easy, what had been challenging, where he'd struggled with the protocol, where it had felt natural. I took notes because every patient's experience helps me refine the approach for the next person. But there was one moment in that conversation that stayed with me for years since. "You know what the biggest change has been?" Frank said, his eyes getting slightly moist. "It's not even the physical stuff, though that's incredible. It's that I feel like myself again. Like the fog that's been surrounding me for years has lifted. I didn't realize how much I'd been just going through the motions, how disconnected I'd become from my own life. And now I'm back. I'm present. I'm engaged. I care about things again." That's when I knew we'd succeeded. Because restoring erectile function is important, but it's not the real goal. The real goal is restoring a man's sense of himself, his engagement with life, his connection to what matters. Sexual function is just one manifestation of that larger vitality. Frank continued with the protocol. When I saw him at 3 months, his blood work had transformed. His inflammation markers had dropped by 60%. His free testosterone had nearly doubled, not through supplementation, but through his body's natural production. His vascular function tests showed substantial improvement. His cognitive assessments were sharper. But more importantly, Frank had become an evangelist. He'd started talking to other men his age, sharing what he'd learned, encouraging them to seek real answers instead of just accepting decline as inevitable. "I had lunch with 3 guys from my old work crew last week," he told me. "We're all around the same age. And when the conversation turned to health stuff, which it always does at our age, I just started talking about what you'd taught me. Doc, you should have seen their faces. Every single one of them was dealing with the same things I had been, and nobody had ever explained it to them the way you explained it to me. That's the tragedy of modern medicine. We've become so specialized, so focused on treating individual symptoms, that we've lost sight of the human being sitting in front of us. We've forgotten that the body is an integrated system, that everything affects everything else. that you can't compartmentalize health into neat little boxes. Now, I want to be very clear about something. What I've described, the protocol I gave Frank, the dietary changes, the approach to restoring masculine vitality, this isn't a replacement for proper medical care. If you're experiencing erectile dysfunction, you need to see a doctor. You need proper evaluation to rule out serious underlying conditions. You need professional guidance tailored to your specific situation. What I'm describing is a comprehensive approach that addresses root causes alongside any necessary medical treatment. It's not either-or, it's both-and. But here's what I want you to understand on a deeper level. Your body at 70 is not a broken-down version of your body at 30. It's a different body with different needs, different strengths, different requirements. And when you understand those needs and meet them appropriately, your body is capable of remarkable things. I've seen 75-year-old men restore sexual function they thought was gone forever. I've watched 80-year-olds reverse cognitive decline and reclaim mental clarity. I've witnessed couples in their late 60s rediscover intimacy and connection they hadn't experienced in decades. None of it is magic. All of it is biology. Your body wants to heal, it wants to function properly, it wants to thrive. But it needs the right raw materials, the right environment, the right support. The question is, are you willing to provide those things? Because here's the hard truth. And I'm going to be completely honest with you because you deserve honesty. Making these changes isn't easy. It requires letting go of comfortable habits and familiar foods. It requires going against mainstream advice that everyone around you is following. It requires persistence when results don't come as quickly as you'd like. It requires belief in yourself when doubt creeps in. But the alternative, continuing on your current path, hoping things will somehow improve on their own, watching your vitality slip away month by month, is that really easier? Is slowly losing yourself really preferable to the temporary discomfort of change? I've spent 35 years helping men answer that question. And the ones who find the courage to choose change, who commit to understanding and meeting their body's actual needs, those are the men who get their lives back. Frank Holloway is 74 now, 2 years beyond that midnight drive to the emergency room. And when I saw him last month for a routine follow-up, he told me something that brought tears to my eyes. "Doc," he said, "Gloria and I are planning a trip to Italy next spring. Just the two of us. We haven't done something like that in 15 years. And you know what? I'm not worried. Not about my energy, not about my health, not about whether I'll be able to keep up. For the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of what comes next. I'm excited about it." That's what this is really about. Not just fixing a physical problem, but reclaiming your future. Refusing to accept that your best years are behind you. Choosing to be fully alive for whatever time you have left. You are not too old. It is not too late. Your body is still capable of remarkable recovery and renewal. But it needs your help. It needs you to understand what's really happening and to make choices aligned with that understanding. I'm Dr. Charles Bennett, and everything I've shared with you tonight comes from decades of clinical experience and thousands of conversations with men just like you. Men who were scared, confused, frustrated, and convinced they were past the point of no return. They were wrong. And if you're thinking the same thing about yourself, you're wrong too. This is not medical advice. This is educational information designed to help you have more informed conversations with your own healthcare providers. Before making any changes to your diet, lifestyle, or medications, consult with qualified professionals who understand your specific situation. But don't let that be an excuse for inaction. Don't let another month pass while you hope things will magically improve. Schedule that appointment. Have that conversation. Start asking the right questions. And, most importantly, start believing that change is possible. Because it is. I've seen it happen hundreds of times, and there's no reason it can't happen for you. If this message reached you tonight, drop a comment below. Let me know what resonated, what challenged you, what questions you have. And if you know another man who needs to hear this, someone who's suffering in silence, share this with him. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is show someone else they're not alone. Remember, your masculinity isn't defined by any single function. It's defined by your courage, your resilience, your willingness to keep fighting for what matters. And right now, what matters is taking back control of your health and your future. You've got this. Now go show your body what it's still capable of.